All right, today we're going to jump into a book of the Bible that, well, let's be honest, a lot of us tend to skip over. I'm talking about Leviticus. Specifically, we're going to unpack chapter 7, which is all about the laws for the offerings. And I get it, it can seem like just a dry list of ancient rules, but I promise you, if you look closer, there's something beautiful and deeply meaningful hidden in all these details. It's this incredible picture of how a holy God makes a way for his people to actually come near to him.
So, the big question is this book just a dusty old set of rules? No way. It is so much more than that. I like to think of it as God's divine blueprint, It's his instructions for how we, as imperfect people, can actually have a real, living relationship with a God who is perfectly holy. These commands, they're not just random. They're a grace-filled guide to being in communion with our Creator. So let's dive in and look at the first part of that blueprint.
All right, so Leviticus 7 really zeroes in on two main offerings. You've got the trespass offering and the peace offering. Now, these might sound kind of similar, but they served completely different purposes in the life of an Israelite. Both were super important, though, so let's break them down.
Okay, so first up is the trespass offering. This one was all about when you did something specifically wrong, either against God's holy things or, and this is key, against your neighbor. And the critical thing to get here is that it wasn't just about saying you're sorry. It was about making things right. You had to make restitution. That part wasn't optional. This whole offering was designed to restore relationships that had been damaged by sin, both your relationship with God and your relationships with other people. And when you put these two offerings next to each other, the difference is just striking. You see, the trespass offering, it starts from a place of brokenness, right? A specific sin was committed, and it needed to be atoned for. It was all about getting forgiveness. But the peace offering? That starts from a place of pure joy. It was a way to say thank you to God or to fulfill a promise you made. And the best part? It always ended with a shared meal. It was literally about sitting down and having a feast in fellowship with God. What an amazing picture. And God even gets specific about the timing of the celebration meal. I mean, look at this. If it was a Thanksgiving offering, you had to eat it the same day. And you got to ask, why? Why the rush? Well, it seems like God was encouraging this immediate, joyful sharing. He didn't want this sacred gift to turn into just leftovers in the back of the tent. It was special. By making sure anything left over was burned by day 3, it preserved the holiness of the whole thing. Okay, so we've covered the how-to of these offerings, but now the chapter kind of zooms in and gets really specific about certain parts of the animal. And this is where we move from just the mechanics of worship to something much deeper. We get these two incredible declarations about holiness, about what belongs to God and only to God. I mean, look at that statement. It's so simple, but it's incredibly powerful. You have to understand, in that culture, the fat was considered the richest part, the best of the best. So when God says all the fat is the Lord's, he's teaching a timeless principle of worship. He's saying, I deserve your very best. Not what's left over, not what's convenient for you, but the first and the finest. That's true worship. And the second command here is maybe even more foundational. You shall eat no blood, period. And the reason, which the Bible explains elsewhere, is that the life of a creature is in its blood. So see, this was never just about diet. It was this constant physical reminder that life itself is sacred, life belongs to God, he's the one who gives it, and this law was meant to instill a deep, deep reverence for that truth. And just so we're clear, this wasn't some gentle suggestion from God. The penalty for ignoring these rules was severe. You would be cut off from his people. That's serious. It just goes to show how seriously God takes his own holiness. If you wanted to be part of his covenant family, you had to live by his standards. To ignore them meant risking being cut off from that family entirely. So you might be wondering, if the fat and the blood belong to God, what happens to the rest of the animal? Well, the end of the chapter explains just that. It lays out how God used these very offerings to provide for the priests. It was this amazing, built-in system that sustained the whole spiritual life of the community. Specifically, from the peace offerings, God set aside certain portions. They're called the wave breast and the heave shoulder, and these were for the priests. This was literally how they got their food. You have to remember, the priestly tribe, the Levites, they didn't get a piece of the promised land like the other tribes. Why? Because the Bible says the Lord himself was their inheritance. So this system, it was the practical, God-designed way he took care of them, right through the worship of the very people they were serving. And God makes it crystal clear. This wasn't just a temporary plan. He calls it a statute forever. It was meant to be a permanent, foundational part of how their community worked for all their generations. It's really beautiful, actually. It created this system where the people and their spiritual leaders were completely dependent on one another, all centered around the worship of God.
Okay, that was a lot of detail, I know. So let's zoom out for a second and look at the big picture. When you boil it all down, what are the main things we should be taking away from all these specific laws in Leviticus chapter 7?
Well, when you really look past all the specifics, what you find are these timeless truths about who God is. We see that He is absolutely holy, but at the same time, He provides a very specific way for us to come to Him. We learn that true worship means giving Him our absolute best. We're reminded that life itself is sacred, and we see that all of God's laws are designed for a purpose, to build and sustain a community that is set apart for Him.
And that really brings us to the most important point of all. Because the New Testament tells us in the book of Hebrews that all of these laws, they were a shadow of the good things that were still to come. All the sacrifices, all the blood, all the work of the priests, every single detail was pointing forward to someone and something greater. It was all a placeholder for the one perfect sacrifice of Jesus Christ. And you just have to ask yourself, if this was the beautiful, intricate shadow, can you imagine the glory of the reality it was pointing to?